Have you ever noticed that anxiety often shows up before anything has actually gone wrong? You're sitting in traffic, waiting for a text, opening your email, or lying in bed, and somehow your brain has already convinced you that something is about to happen. For many people, anxiety isn't just caused by stressful situations. It's caused by a brain that's become incredibly good at predicting danger, even when there's very little danger to predict. Today, you'll learn to stand up against anxiety through these 9 simple brain training exercises. If you've been searching for natural ways to calm anxiety, manage anxious thoughts, or train your brain to feel calmer without relying only on willpower, this video is for you. The goal is to stop your brain from treating every uncertain moment like an emergency. Brain exercise 1. Catch the prediction before the emotion. One of the biggest misconceptions about anxiety is that emotions come first. In reality, your brain is constantly making predictions about what's about to happen, and your emotions often follow those predictions. Imagine your manager messages you with, "Can we talk later?" Within seconds, your brain may finish the story. "I'm probably in trouble. I must have made a mistake. This can't be good." Notice something important. None of those are facts, they're predictions. Your brain hates uncertainty, so instead of waiting for information, it fills in the missing pieces as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, anxious brains tend to fill those gaps with worst-case scenarios. Neuroscientists often describe the brain as a prediction machine. Rather than simply reacting to the world, it's constantly guessing what will happen next based on past experiences. That means anxiety often begins long before reality has had a chance to speak. Here's the exercise. The next time you notice anxiety appearing, don't ask yourself, "Why am I anxious?" Instead ask, "What prediction is my brain making right now?" Be specific. Maybe it's, "I'm going to embarrass myself. They're probably judging me. This feeling will never stop. I'm going to fail." The moment you identify the prediction, ask one more question. What evidence do I actually have for this prediction? Not possibilities, not feelings, evidence. This tiny pause forces your thinking brain back into the conversation before your emotional brain takes over completely. You're not arguing with yourself. You're simply separating prediction from reality. Most people have never learned this distinction. They experience the prediction as if it's already happening. That's why anxiety feels so convincing. Over time, repeatedly catching these automatic predictions teaches your brain something powerful. Not every uncertain situation deserves an emergency response. And that's exactly the lesson an anxious brain often needs. But predictions are only one part of the puzzle. There's another hidden habit that quietly strengthens anxiety every single day, and most people don't even notice they're doing it. Brain exercise 2. Train your attention instead of fighting your thoughts. When people feel anxious, their first instinct is usually to get rid of the thoughts. They tell themselves, "Stop thinking, calm down, don't worry." Ironically, this usually makes the thoughts louder. It's similar to trying not to think about a pink elephant. Your brain immediately brings the elephant into focus. The problem isn't necessarily the anxious thought, it's where your attention becomes trapped. Psychologists sometimes compare attention to a flashlight. Wherever the flashlight points, your brain assumes that's what's most important. Anxiety has a habit of grabbing that flashlight and refusing to let go. You replay the same conversation. You reread the same message. You scan your body for symptoms. You mentally rehearse problems that haven't happened. The longer the flashlight stays there, the more significant the threat feels. Instead of trying to switch the flashlight off, which is almost impossible, you can practice moving it. Pick one ordinary object near you. Maybe it's your coffee mug, a window, a plant, a pen. Now, spend 20 seconds studying it as if you've never seen one before. Notice its texture, its color, its shape, the tiny scratches, the reflections of light, then move to another object and repeat. You're not distracting yourself. You're deliberately practicing flexible attention. That's an important difference. Research in cognitive neuroscience suggests that strengthening attentional control helps reduce the tendency to become stuck in repetitive negative thinking. Think of it like exercising a muscle. Every time you intentionally move your attention, you're reminding your brain that it has options. Anxiety says, "You have to keep thinking about this." Attention training quietly answers, "No, I can choose where my focus goes." It sounds almost too simple, but remember, your brain changes through repetition, not complexity. The more often you practice moving your attention voluntarily, the less power anxious thoughts have to hold it hostage. And speaking of attention, there's another surprising place anxiety quietly steals it: from your own body. Most people assume they're very aware of what's happening inside them. The reality is often the opposite. And that's where the next brain exercise becomes incredibly interesting. Brain exercise 3. Recalibrate your body's alarm system. Here's something that surprises a lot of people. Your brain isn't actually reading your body as accurately as you might think. It's interpreting it. A slightly faster heartbeat after climbing the stairs can be interpreted as, "I'm out of breath," or it can become, "Something feels wrong." A flutter in your stomach before giving a presentation can become excitement, or it can become proof that you're about to panic. The physical sensation may be almost identical. What changes is the story your brain attaches to it. Neuroscientists call this interoception, your brain's ability to sense what's happening inside your body. And research suggests that anxiety isn't always about feeling more sensations. It's often about interpreting normal sensations as signs of danger. This is why someone with anxiety might notice every heartbeat, every muscle twitch, or every change in breathing. The brain has become hypervigilant, constantly asking, "Is this a problem?" The exercise is surprisingly simple. Once or twice a day, pause for about a minute. Close your eyes if you're comfortable. Instead of scanning your body for what's wrong, become curious about what's simply there. Can you feel where your feet touch the floor? Can you notice the temperature of your hands? Can you tell which part of your body feels the heaviest? Can you feel your breathing without trying to change it? The goal isn't relaxation. The goal is accuracy. You're teaching your brain to observe your body instead of immediately judging it. That small shift matters. When your brain becomes better at reading normal body signals without labeling them as threats, its internal alarm system gradually becomes less sensitive. Think of it like recalibrating a smoke detector that's been going off every time someone makes toast. You're not removing the alarm. You're helping it respond more appropriately. Many people discover that once they stop constantly checking whether they're anxious, the anxiety itself becomes less demanding, because the brain no longer receives the message that every sensation deserves immediate investigation. But there's another habit that quietly keeps anxiety alive, and it has nothing to do with your body. It has to do with your relationship with uncertainty. And this next exercise may be one of the most useful skills you can build. Brain exercise 4. Practice tiny doses of uncertainty. If anxiety had a favorite food, it would probably be certainty. Think about how often your brain wants guarantees. Will everything work out? What if I make the wrong decision? What if they don't reply? What if I fail? The brain wants answers immediately because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. But here's the catch. The more you demand certainty, the less tolerant your brain becomes of everyday unknowns. It's a little like avoiding every staircase because you're afraid of getting tired. At first it feels easier. Eventually, climbing even a few steps feels exhausting. The same thing happens with uncertainty. Every time you avoid it, your brain learns that uncertainty must be dangerous. Instead of building resilience, it builds dependence on reassurance. That's why constantly checking your phone, repeatedly asking for reassurance, rereading emails before sending them, or endlessly researching every possible outcome often brings only temporary relief. The relief feels good, but it teaches your brain to repeat the cycle. So here's a different kind of exercise. Give your brain one small, harmless uncertainty every day. Leave a text message unanswered for 15 minutes before checking for a reply. Choose something from a restaurant menu without reading every review beforehand. Go for a walk without planning the exact route. Send an email after one careful proofread instead of 10. Notice what happens. Your brain may protest. It may say, "What if this goes wrong?" Let it say that. You don't have to argue with it. You simply allow the uncertainty to exist without immediately trying to erase it. Over time, your brain starts collecting new evidence. I've been uncertain before, and nothing terrible happened. This is how confidence is quietly built, not by eliminating uncertainty, but by becoming more comfortable living alongside it. And that leads to something many people overlook. Sometimes anxiety isn't coming from what's happening around you. It's coming from where your brain believes you should be looking. The next exercise changes that in a surprisingly physical way. Brain exercise 5. Expand your visual horizon. Have you ever noticed what your eyes do when you're anxious? Most people don't. But if you pay attention, you'll often find that your vision narrows without you realizing it. You lock onto your laptop screen. You stare at your phone. You fixate on the person you're talking to, or you focus on the one thing that seems threatening. This isn't random. It's part of your brain's survival response. When the brain detects possible danger, it naturally shifts into a more focused mode. Your field of attention becomes narrower because in a real emergency, concentrating on one threat could help you react faster. The problem is that modern anxiety often triggers this same response while you're answering emails, waiting in line at the grocery store, or lying awake at night. Your brain behaves as if you're in immediate danger even though you're completely safe. Here's a simple way to interrupt that pattern. Without moving your head, look straight ahead. Now, instead of focusing on one object, become aware of everything you can see in your peripheral vision. Notice the edges of the room, the ceiling, the floor, the corners, the movement off to the sides. Stay there for about 30 seconds. Don't force anything. Just allow your awareness to widen. Why does this help? Your visual system and your nervous system are more connected than most people realize. A broader visual field often signals to the brain that there's no immediate threat demanding your full attention. It's a subtle cue that says, the environment is safe enough to take in. Think about the difference between a deer scanning an open field and a cat staring at a single mouse. One is broadly aware, the other is intensely locked in. An anxious brain often behaves more like the cat, even when there's nothing to chase. This exercise gently reminds your nervous system that it doesn't have to stay in tunnel vision all day. Many people find it especially useful before an important meeting, while sitting in traffic, or anytime they notice themselves becoming mentally stuck. It's a tiny shift, but it can change the way your brain reads the entire situation. And speaking of getting stuck, there's another habit anxiety is incredibly good at creating. It convinces you that you have to finish every thought before you can move on. That sounds logical, but it's one of the biggest traps an anxious mind falls into. Brain exercise. 6. Leave the thought unfinished. Imagine starting a TV series and stopping halfway through the first episode. Your brain doesn't like that. It wants closure. Psychologists have known for decades that unfinished tasks tend to stay active in our minds. This is often called the Zeigarnik effect. Our brains naturally keep track of things that feel incomplete. Anxiety takes advantage of this. It creates mental questions that seem impossible to answer. What if I lose my job? What if something happens to my family? What if I made a mistake? The brain keeps chasing these questions because it believes there's an answer hiding somewhere. So you keep thinking and thinking and thinking. Except many anxious questions don't actually have complete answers. They're based on future possibilities, not present facts. The more you chase certainty, the more unfinished the thought feels. Here's the exercise. The next time you catch yourself looping on an anxious question, resist the urge to solve it immediately. Instead, finish the sentence like this: maybe, and I don't know yet. For example, maybe that meeting won't go the way I hope, and I don't know yet. Maybe they won't text back today, and I don't know yet. Maybe this feeling will last another hour, and I don't know yet. Notice what's happening. You're not pretending everything will be fine. You're also not assuming the worst. You're allowing reality to remain unfinished until reality actually unfolds. This teaches your brain something it rarely practices. Not every unanswered question needs an immediate answer. That's an incredibly valuable skill because life itself is full of incomplete information. The people who appear calm all the time aren't necessarily people who know what's going to happen. Often they're simply more comfortable waiting to find out. And there's one final mental habit that quietly ties many of these exercises together. It's something your brain does thousands of times a day without asking your permission. Once you notice it, you'll start seeing anxiety in a completely different way. Brain exercise. 7. Name the story, not just the feeling. When anxiety shows up, it rarely arrives as a blank emotion. It usually comes with a story. I'm falling behind. Everyone else has it figured out. If I don't do this perfectly, people will notice. The interesting thing is that these stories often become so familiar that they feel like facts instead of interpretations. Our brains are wired to create narratives. That's useful because stories help us make sense of the world. But when we're anxious, the brain tends to recycle the same story over and over, even when the situation changes. Here's a simple exercise. The next time you notice anxiety, don't just say, "I'm anxious." Instead, ask yourself, what's the story my brain is telling me? Then give that story a short title. Maybe it's the worst-case scenario, the perfection story, the mind-reading story, the I'm running out of time story. By naming the story instead of becoming the story, you create a little psychological distance. Think of it like watching a movie. You can become completely absorbed in the characters, or you can suddenly remember, oh, this is a movie. The movie hasn't disappeared, but your relationship with it has changed. The same thing happens with anxious thoughts. You're not denying them. You're recognizing them as mental stories rather than guaranteed outcomes. That small shift often makes it much easier to choose your next action instead of reacting automatically. And that brings us to something anxiety quietly steals from many people: curiosity. Brain exercise 8. Replace certainty with curiosity. Anxiety loves conclusions. Curiosity loves questions. Imagine you're about to walk into a meeting. Anxiety says, this is going to go badly. Curiosity asks, I wonder how this will actually turn out. Those two thoughts may sound similar, but they activate very different ways of thinking. One assumes it already knows the future. The other leaves room for new information. This exercise is incredibly simple. Whenever you catch yourself predicting a negative outcome, replace the prediction with a curious question. Instead of, I know I'll mess this up, try, I wonder what I'll learn from this. Instead of, everyone will judge me, try, I wonder what people are actually paying attention to. You'll often discover something surprising. Most people are far more focused on themselves than they are on judging you. Curiosity naturally reduces mental rigidity. It reminds your brain that reality is still unfolding. This doesn't mean becoming unrealistically optimistic, it means staying open enough to let reality surprise you. Many of the moments we worried about the most never happened the way we imagined. Not because we forced positive thinking, but because our predictions were simply incomplete. And there's one final exercise that quietly brings everything together. It's probably the easiest to remember, yet over time it can completely change how your brain responds to anxious moments. Brain exercise 9. End every day by teaching your brain what was safe. Our brains naturally remember potential threats more strongly than ordinary moments. From an evolutionary perspective, that made sense. Remembering danger helped our ancestors survive. Today, though, it can create a distorted picture of daily life. You remember the awkward conversation. You remember the stressful meeting. You remember the mistake, but your brain often skips over the dozens of things that went perfectly normally. Here's the exercise. At the end of each day, spend just 1 minute recalling 3 moments that turned out better than your anxious brain expected. Maybe you thought your presentation would be a disaster. It wasn't. Maybe you expected someone to react negatively. They didn't. Maybe you were convinced your anxiety would ruin your afternoon, yet somehow you still got through your work, cooked dinner, laughed with a friend, or enjoyed a quiet walk. These don't have to be big victories. In fact, ordinary moments are often the most powerful. Why? Because you're updating your brain's prediction system with real evidence. You're teaching it. Not every uncertainty became a problem. Not every uncomfortable feeling became a crisis. Not every fear came true. Over weeks and months, those small updates begin to accumulate. This is how the brain learns. Not through one dramatic breakthrough, but through repeated experiences that quietly rewrite its expectations. And that's the bigger idea behind every exercise we've covered today. You're not trying to convince yourself that life is perfectly safe. You're helping your brain become more accurate. You're teaching it to pause before predicting, to observe before reacting, to become curious instead of certain, to notice what's actually happening instead of what it fears might happen. Those are skills, and like any skill, they become stronger with practice. If even one of these brain exercises made you look at anxiety differently, don't try all 9 tomorrow. Pick one. Practice it consistently for a week. Then add another. Your brain changes through repetition far more than intensity. If you found this video genuinely useful, consider giving it a like and subscribing to Simple Ways of Life. It helps us keep creating practical, research-backed videos that respect your time and give you something you can actually use in everyday life. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.